Do you know what the best type of advice in the world is? It's homework advice, of course, and it begins right now. Let's take a deep dive into this week's homework. Again, you can't write code for a problem that you don't understand, so step one is getting a good understanding of the problem at hand. So I don't know if you're familiar or not with Reddit, but Reddit is a community website where there are these little communities called subreddits. Like I'm in the world news subreddit, and in here there are articles posted and people can make comments on the articles. So I don't know if you knew this, but for any Reddit, for any subreddit, there is, if you put JSON at the end of it, you will get an API version of that subreddit. This website is very API friendly. So if you just take a quick look, it says world's wealthy must radicalize change of their lifestyles, right? UN reports. And if we look in here, that we'll find that same article in here somewhere. Grave threat somewhere in here. Same idea. So this is the JSON equivalent or JSON equivalent of this you see here, which is the HTML equivalent. So we will use this as an API. By default, it gets 25 stories out of here. So if you look in the children tag, the children key in the dictionary, you'll see there's a list. And then in that list, there is a title key, which is right here. That is the title of the story. Our goal is to do the following. We're going to pick a subreddit, and I've provided you with a list of subreddits that you can select from. And so we'll use IPython Interact to display a drop-down of these subreddits. After you pick the subreddit, it will invoke the JSON version of that Reddit, retrieve it into Python, extract all the titles out, okay, which are the top 25 title stories. Then you will take those 25 title stories and combine them into one large pile of text, and then send that one large pile of text to the sentiment analyzer that we used in the lab to get a sense of whether the stories, based on title alone, are either neutral, negative, or positive. And that way you can do an analysis of the different subreddits. You can do an analysis of the different subreddits and figure out which ones have positive vibes, which ones have negative vibes. Okay? That is basically the high-level gist of the Reddit exercise that you will do for your homework. Okay, now there's a lot of details in here. And if you look through by hints and advice, you will see that there's a lot of things that you sort of need to mull over in order to figure this out. Okay, so what I will do for you as part of solving this problem is I won't put the entire program together for you, but I will make sure you have all of the pieces in working order. And so then it will be up to you to complete the main interact that gives you a drop down and then analyzes the sentiment. And what I will do next is I will show you what the final product looks like so that you have an understanding of how it all works. Okay? So here's my program running. And you'll see I can pick a subreddit like news. And it says the overall subreddit, the overall sentiment of subreddit news is neutral. And I can say awe. The overall sentiment of subreddit awe is neutral. And let's try today I learned. Today I learned is a lot of neutrals. World news, neutral. Oh man, I don't know. Is it working? Writing prompts, neutral. Free compliments, negative. Okay. Reddit, negative. Okay, so it seems to be working. But basically, that's what you want to do. And you also want to trust that it's right. I know mine's right. You might want to display the percentage along with negative, and we have an example of how to do that as well in the lab. So I'll leave that up to you. You could also, if you want, display the actual stories. I chose to not do that. But this is overall what it does. And every time you pick one of these, like if I pick World News, what is it doing? It's going here, getting all of this, then it's finding each of the titles and combining them into one large string, because that's the way the sentiment analyzer needs to work. And then it's sending that big large string of titles to the sentiment analyzer, and then that's coming back with positive, negative, or neutral. That's basically it. So the main program, and I will show you the main program. The main program is basically, you know, 4 steps. Get the stories, extract the titles, get the sentiment, print the sentiment out. Okay? This we did in the lab, so I'm not going to bother to do that. You just have to figure out how to turn it into a function. You input any text here, and it should output the sentiment. And this sentiment, by the way, is a dictionary. If I go ahead and print the sentiment out, it is just the raw output of what comes back from there. This is the sentiment. So that's all this get sentiment does. Extract titles takes in that list, that Python data structure of stories, which is here. And then what it returns back is a big string of all the titles. So let me print out titles to show you what that looks like. And see, these are all the titles in AMA. Let's do the titles in uplifting news. There we go. There's the titles in uplifting news. And here's the titles in Reddit. Okay, and if I go down, it says overall sentiment in subreddit is negative. Now, if you don't believe that, I can print that as well here. And let's pick Reddit again. Reddit. And down here it says probability negative 65%, neutral 18%, positive 34%. So the overall label is negative. So this is just me printing the raw stuff out. So what is this one do? This one makes a HTTP GET to this URL. Oh, this one's top. World News. Yep, that's what I wanted. World News. And it gets me the World News. And then that goes into stories, and then from stories I just pull out the title. So this again is one large string, and I'm going to show you a little bit. I'm going to show you the strategies for doing this and this, but you're going to have to write them as functions. Okay, it's high time now that you should be able to refactor many things into a function. I won't give you this because you already know how to do this. Okay, and that's basically the entire look, if you will, at the program. All right, now that we've seen the big picture, let's think about solving the problem. So what goes into this program? A subreddit, like World News. What comes out? Let's just say a list of 25 stories and the overall sentiment of those stories. Or you could do it like I did it. It's up to you. And just return back the sentiment of those 25 stories. Okay. And the algorithm at a very high level, again, you're gonna, algorithms are good at a high level. And then you just got to break them down into juicy little bits that Python can understand. But I want to get the stories from the web, get stories from subreddit. And then I want to extract the titles only from stories. And then I want to determine sentiment of titles. And then lastly, I want to print out the sentiment. And maybe the titles, and or the titles. Depends on what mood you're in. That's basically an algorithm. That's why when I see an algorithm that says import JSON, I just want to like scream. Because, again, that's not an algorithm. An algorithm is a series of steps that you follow to solve a problem. How do I get to the carrier dome from right here? Step 1 is I get out of the chair. Step 2 is I walk upstairs. Step 3 is I get in my car. You know, and then it starts to get a little more detailed. But you get it. You need, it's a set of instructions that explain how to solve a problem. Okay, and this is hard. You get better at this as you go about doing it. Okay, so let's look at each of these. There's no reason for me to do 3 and 4 because 4 is trivial. This is trivial. I think everybody knows how to print stuff. This is, we did this in the lab, so your job is to refactor this into a function where in goes any text and out goes the sentiment of any text. Okay? That's what this does. It determines the sentiment independent of whether it's a Reddit story or not. It's just a bunch of text and says, what's the sentiment of this text? You could be sending it love letters. It doesn't matter, right? That's what's important about functions is they should work independently of each other. The only one that's going to be a little dependent is this extract stories from titles. It's only going to work with Reddit titles, but that's, just an edge case. So let's start to think about this get stories from subreddit. And again, you can write it as a function. I'm just going to write the code for it. To get the stories from the subreddit, we're going to need to do the pattern that we looked at in the lab, where we we import requests, right? That's a given. And then you're going to have a URL. It's URL. There's a pattern every time you want to do something where you call a service on the internet, and you're going to say response is request get that URL, right? And then somewhere down here you're going to say response raise for status. Always. And this is going to guarantee that if you do not, this pretty much says if you don't get 200, then throw an error, which is important because we want to know if there's a problem with the way we call the API, or if there's a problem in our Python code. We need to be able to differentiate between that. And if we don't catch the problem with going out over the internet, we're going to end up getting a problem in our Python code. We're going to think it's a problem in our Python code when really it's a problem with the URL. So this just shifts the responsibility to the right person. That's why you want to add it. Okay, then we want to say, this is going to be data equals response JSON, right? Assuming that it's in JSON format. This code is always the same to call any API out there with an HTTP GET. Okay, so this is, I'm going to say recipe for calling any API with HTTP GET. Where it differs is when the demands of the particular API. That's where it differs. So let's read what the demands are of using the Reddit API. Fetching the Reddit stories from an API. Reddit API requires you to use a unique user agent in the headers of the GET request. Okay, so I need to pass in headers, my headers, I guess, and then I need to build my headers. And it's a dictionary. All of these are dictionaries, whether they're a query string or headers, they're always a dictionary. And what do I need to put in the headers? It says you need a user agent key, user agent. And then what do I need afterwards? It says I need the value of the user agent key should be this. Okay, this is just a way, by the way, for Reddit to know who is using the API. They just want to keep track of this. Excuse me. so that they can put abusers in their place. Trust me, we're not going to be labeled an abuser. We're small peanuts. So in here, this net ID, you should make it your net ID. All right. There's my headers. Now let's complete the URL. The URL should be, I know it says top JSON, but a better one to use, honestly, is this. You could use top JSON, right? Whereas if you did that, this would be the subreddit. And you're going to f-string that, right? And then you're going to, this, you know, subreddit. This is what's going to go in. This is going to be the function input. I'm just going to use world news. This is going to be the function input argument. You know, you're not going to code in world news. You're going to like let it come into the function. I don't like to use top JSON. I like to just use subreddit JSON, which gives me the latest 25 stories, not the top stories, the latest stories. You can use top if you want, doesn't matter. Okay, now what I'm going to do down here is I'm just going to show you what is in the variable data when I run this. And wow, on the first try it worked, which means I'm incredibly lucky because normally I'm making a mistake somewhere, but I didn't. And that's probably because I've written this code at least a dozen times. So if you look in here, you'll see kind, listing, children, and then so you have data, then children, and then after children you have a list, and this is each of the 25 stories. And so down here, if I go down further, you will see data again, and then in there, one of the keys is called title. There you go. Okay, so we peeled off our first story. Now, you need to turn this code here. This is going to be your get stories from subreddit. That's going to be that. But you want to write this as a function, right? So this comes in, this is returned. That's basically it. Now, after you call this function, you know, you're going to call the function, you're going to get back, like I did in my example, you're going to get back like stories or something. You're going to call it, you know, something. You're not going to call it data, right? Because this works for just any request. But what did we pull back out of this get Reddit? We got the Reddit stories, right? So let me just do this. Okay, and now I've got this stories variable, and it has the same information in it as this up here. Okay, now what I have to do is I have to extract the title from all of the stories, and I got to get every single title out. Okay, and again, I'm not going to write all this for you, but I'm going to write most of it for you. And then it's going to be up to you to figure it out. So the first thing you need to figure out is where are these 25 stories. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6. They're under this key children, which is under the key data. Data, children. So let's go back to our code. We need to go stories, data. There's children. Children. There you go. So now you've got a list. I'll show you that. What's the type of this? It's a list. Okay. Now that you know it's a list, you're going to loop over it. So you're going to do something like this. You're going to say, you know, for story in stories data children, like this, right? Now, you have to build a string of titles. So start with an empty title. And then what you want to do is keep appending each title to the story, or each story title to the titles. But you got to find in story, you have to find in story, you have to find the title right here. And that is what you've got to figure out. Where is the, how do I get to this key? Okay, I'm not going to tell you that. But I am going to grab this kind key to show you how it would work. Like, so this kind says T3, right? All right, so what I can do is I could say titles equals titles plus, you know, story. I want to say story, you know, how do I get the title key out of here? But you're going to figure that out. But instead, what I'm going to do is just going to pull any old key. I'm going to pull the kind key. And then what I want to do is add to that a new line so that it puts one title on each line. And then when I'm done now and I do titles, what I get are 25 titles. But in this case, I'm going to get 25 T3s because I grabbed kind. You know, if I print this, there you go. Okay? That's 25 of those. You don't want to print these. You want to print 25 titles, right? But you have to figure out what key goes here. I'm not going to do that for you. And my final solution that I have down at the bottom, that solution has all the titles in it, and that's what I'm going to send to the sentiment analyzer, right? That's going to be this step here. I'm going to input that string of titles, and it's going to output that sentiment dictionary. And then finally, I'm going to print out the goods, okay? That's basically the entire program, okay? And that's a huge hint. That's a big piece of advice. Hopefully that will make it pretty easy for you to cruise and figure out how to put this together. If you can't refactor them into functions, don't. But I would highly encourage you to try to grow as a programmer and figure out how to refactor each of these into their own function. Okay, that is basically the principle behind a top-down approach. Can I do this in like 1 or 2 lines of Python? No, then I write a function to do it. Can I do this in 1 or 2 lines of Python? No, so I write a function. This, no, so I write a function. This, yeah, I can do that in like 1 or 2 lines of Python, so I'm not going to bother to write that as a function. Okay, that's basically how you attack it from a top-down perspective. And then when you do that, you get, and let me pause it for a second, code that looks like this, where you have just function names that do the work of the steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and then this is all step 4 down here. Okay, and that's the entire program when you write it with functions. Why you want to stretch yourself and write it with functions is because when you do your project, you can do your project with all this code and not use a single function, right? But that's going to affect your grade negatively because that tells us that you have not embraced the modularity that we have been trying to teach you all semester. That's why it's good with the homework to practice it so that you get comfortable with it. So when the time comes to do your final project, you are making modular programs with functions, okay, which is what we want. And that is this week's homework advice. I hope it was helpful. Have a nice day. Goodbye.